On the record this week,
the FBI agents searching the Fulton County elections hub, seizing documents.
There was a search warrant that was filed and filled in federal court. Another attempt to collect 2020 ballots from Fulton County.
Just last week, President Trump said people will soon be prosecuted for what they did in the 2020 presidential election that he lost.
It's a rigged election. Can't have rigged elections.
It's good that the ballots have gotten out of the custody of Fulton County.
Those 700 boxes taken.
I don't know where they are now. I don't know who has them. I have no clue. I can use my imagination.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
Well, this Sunday, renewed efforts to re-examine the 2020 presidential election now reverberating across Georgia. Hundreds of boxes of Fulton County documents tied to that election are now in the hands of the federal government. We're glad you're with us to recap a busy few days. I'm Doug Reardon. Let's start there. FBI agents funneling into Fulton County's elections hub last week. A federal court order allowed them to seize about 700 boxes of ballots from the 2020 presidential race. That race has been the object of President Trump's ire for many, many years now. He has long insisted that the election he lost to former President Joe Biden was rigged and stolen from him, despite multiple audits that found there was no widespread fraud that would have altered the outcome. Fulton County leaders say the seizure of those documents is just the latest attempt to intimidate them, and right before the midterms at that. Officials fear the administration's attempt to relitigate the 2020 election could impact the security of those midterms this fall.
That Fulton County runs excellent elections, and that is the fear. That Fulton County will again run an excellent election in 2026. It just won't turn out the way that they want it to.
Every legal vote was counted. These ongoing efforts are about intimidation and distraction, not facts.
Members of the Republican-led state elections board and conservative activists who have sued the county in order to get their hands on those ballots say the FBI operation is a great step towards transparency.
I think the FBI is going to do their job, and I think it's about time that that people have answers.
Well, I think we're going to find that Fulton County certified tens of thousands of votes for which they have no source ballots for.
And right now, it's not clear where the feds are taking those documents they seized last week. But Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard was seen on site at the raid. President Trump says she's a part of the administration's effort to keep elections, quote, safe.
She's working very hard on trying to keep the election safe, and she's done a very good job. And they, as you know, they got into the votes. You got a signed judge's order. They've been trying to get there for a long time.
Our panel joins us now for the first time today. Madeline Somerville, a Democratic political strategist and trial consultant, and coming back to the show, former Cobb County GOP Chair Jason Shepard. We appreciate you both being here. Let's start with you, Jason. What are we looking for here? We know the FBI came in. We know what they seized by and large. But behind all of this, what's the point?
And I'm trying to figure that out as well. You know, this is almost an archaeological investigation. The 2020 election has passed. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. And it's really part of this group that I have started calling on Peach Pundit, where I blog, the Election Integrity Industrial Complex. It's a group of people who, it doesn't matter what the rules are, it doesn't matter what the law says, they're going to try to find problems. And I do welcome more transparency. And I think this is an opportunity to get this evidence, these ballots, into a court of law where you have objective, not subjective rules of evidence, and it can be looked at. The problem is, what I expect they'll find is some rules weren't followed. There were some issues, but you know what? Fulton County Board of Elections attorney stood up at the State Elections Board meeting in December and stipulated to that, because at this point it doesn't matter.
Right, and I know you're talking about those tabulator tapes that it was discovered they weren't signed, and they did. They owned right up to it on site. And so, Madeline, are you concerned about maybe the long-term impacts that continuing to relitigate this election that is now 6 years old might have on the system in general?
Yeah, I certainly am, and we all know how rumors work. You know, you put as many different theories out there as possible, and they start to catch on, and then it's really, really difficult to get rid of them, despite the fact that there's been no facts or evidence to support any of this ever, regardless of how many times this has been literally litigated. And I think when it comes to the signature issue, My guess is that that's why they got the warrant in the first place. But I would definitely remind people that the signature issue was a double check. And it was a policy that had just been instituted prior to that election. So it was signing off, it was a double check already. So it had already been signed off on as good, missed the double check. And then after that was discovered, it had been audited 4 more times after that. And then we find out that actually those records were supposed to be unsealed in a couple of weeks from now. Right? So why have the president's FBI come in and take them ahead of time when you could establish chain of custody much easier afterwards?
Right. And I know we were joking around right before we came on that there does seem to be a lot of agreement on both sides of this about kind of the tactics that were used. Jason, the president has been very critical of what he calls the weaponization of federal institutions, namely the Justice Department in the many cases that have come up against him. Do you view this as a weaponization of the FBI in this case?
I don't. I look at it as a normal waste of taxpayer resources and FBI time. It's so you're seizing ballots, 700 boxes of what I heard, to really satisfy a very small minority of Republicans. And you had Garland Favorito, who is actually not a Republican. He's head of the Constitution Party for the state of Georgia. And these activists have been pushing and pushing and pushing now for over 5 years. Sally Grubbs, who serves on the State Board of Elections, she succeeded me as chairman of the Cobb County Republican Party. And one of the first things they did under her chairmanship was censure Brian Kemp. And then they decided to hold a vigil for the victims of January 6th. So it's all these, of course, the victims were not the police officers, it was the people arrested. So it's part of this group that is extremely loyal for Donald Trump, which we call Ultra MAGA. And there's no doubt about it that this is, obviously being pushed from the White House to carry on this narrative. And they believe that their whole hearts that there's something being hidden, that this is going to result in Brad Raffensperger being thrown in prison. I see it on social media, and it's just, in my opinion, lunacy.
Yeah, real quick, Madeline. Commissioner Mo Ivory with Fulton County said this is just the beginning. Is that how you feel?
I do. I do feel it's just the beginning. I'm afraid of the fact that there are National Guardsmen that are in many cities, as well as ICE. And I'm afraid of what that's going to look like for the 2026 midterms. And I think when it comes to Brad Raffensperger, really quick, the biggest mistake that the Democrats have made in a long time was not standing right next to Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp when they said, no, this is the truth, and we're not going to give in to whatever false narrative. This was all good. I don't know why Stacey Abrams or the rest of the Democratic Party didn't say, hey, good job, good on you, thank you for having integrity. It was a huge mistake because they could have gained so much credibility.
Right, because I think, like the two of you, they had more in common than they think they did.
Absolutely.
On this issue.
Right.
Certainly. All right, don't go anywhere. Still ahead on the record, new efforts at the Capitol to make buying a home cheaper, eliminating Georgia's income tax, and putting money back in your pocket. All good things. Right now, a new push at the Georgia Capitol to eliminate those pesky property taxes that add to the cost of home buying. Last week, lawmakers in the State House introduced a bill that would eliminate homestead property taxes for Georgians by 2032. The plan would gradually phase out those taxes on single-family homes, plus an additional 5 acres. But the bill would eliminate more than $5 billion annually in funding for local governments, including school systems statewide. Republican sponsors of the legislation suggest local governments use their assessments or revenue not associated with home values to make up the cost. They could also raise sales tax and the cost of services like water or trash.
What we were trying to do and trying to accomplish was come up with something that would give homeowners relief and at the same time protect all property owners. And I think that's where we've landed here.
That effort comes at the same time that Republican leaders in the Senate are pushing plans to eliminate the state's income tax. Democratic lawmakers worry that eliminating both at the same time could mean too much loss of revenue at both the state and the local level. But State Senator Blake Tillery told me he's certain that the legislature can do both when we sat down on the record. Well, Senator Tillery, thanks for being with us.
Of course.
Appreciate your time. So you've been appropriations chair up here now for a couple of years. When did you first start to look at the budget and say, I think we can eliminate the income tax?
I've been interested in this since I was on the county commission. Remember, I got elected when I was 28, and the reason that I probably ended up heading on to the Senate with the support of my district was because we reduced property taxes every year I was chairman. So I understand that we're not spending our money, we're spending the people's money, and if we have excess, then we need to be returning it to them. But let's also look at the times we're living in. There's families right now who are having a really hard time paying for gas, groceries, childcare, their power bill. And if we're in an opportunity, because of how we've budgeted, to be able to do more with less and give that money back to them, it just makes common sense.
So here's the thing that people are pointing out, right? The income tax in Georgia represents about 44%, correct me if I'm wrong, of the general budget. Where do we make that up? That's a huge portion of the state's income.
You're talking about a big number, right? $16 billion that the state brings in on income tax. You don't eliminate that in 1 year. The Senate's plan under Lieutenant Governor Jones and what we've laid out as the committee does this over 6 years. The Senate's plan in year 1 eliminates the income tax on the first $50,000 of every single employee or every single taxpayer in Georgia. If you're married filing jointly, it eliminates the state income tax, on the first $100,000 that you earn. And that's for everybody. So if you're making $70,000, you're married filing jointly, you would have no state income tax liability because your liability extends up to $100,000. If you were making $150,000, well, you're only going to be taxed on $50,000. But the impact is going to be more felt on those making less than $100,000. We're talking about your teachers, your firefighters, your police officers, your nurses. They're going to see their entire income tax liability completely wiped out in year 1 of this plan. The state brings in, or spends out rather, about $30 billion in corporate welfare each year. The data center tax credit, let's talk about it for a second. If you buy a laptop for your child to go to college at any of one of Georgia's technical colleges or university establishments, you pay sales tax on that computer. But if you buy $15 million worth of computers tonight, you pay sales tax on none of it. That credit now is worth over $700 million a year. If we take those dollars instead of giving them out to folks who are coming anyway, and instead roll them back into a reduction of the income tax for families, we can pay for that in year 2. And by the end of year 1 and the end of year 2, you see 2/3 of Georgians no longer pay state income tax, 64%.
And I know you used the phrase, corporate welfare. I think most people would know it better as tax incentives, things like film credits. You mentioned the data center credit. What does eliminating tax incentives do to the competitiveness of Georgia? Because the governor has really used these effectively to bring in Q-Cells, Hyundai, lots of film and TV here in Georgia over the course of his 8 years.
You talk about Georgia being the #1 state for doing business for the past almost 12 years in a row now. If you're the pretty girl at the dance, you don't have to ask everybody for a dance, they're asking you. I think that what we have to do is prioritize people over corporations. And if we're willing to do that, which is what we should be doing in the first place, take the fact that we've been the #1 state for doing business for over a decade out and use that and apply that benefit to people, then we can make sure that we eliminate their income tax liability. For an individual who's only making $50,000 right now, that's a $2,500 impact you're putting back in their pocket. For a family that's making $100,000, maybe it's a teacher and a coach, or maybe it's a nurse who's married to a firefighter, you put those families together, they're making $100,000. Eliminating their income tax liability puts $5,190 back in their pocket every year forever. That's a great, great investment in our people. And it's one I'm willing to make. And if it means we have to comb back corporate credits by just 10%, that's a bet I'll make every day.
Are you concerned about the House's plan to lower property taxes while you guys are going through this process?
We have no issue with that at all. Remember, the state collects no property taxes. So why would we start collecting one now? There's never been a desire or a move to do that, even in the plan to eliminate the state income tax. So we look forward to working with our friends in the House side. Our plans obviously aren't on a collision course at all. We're dealing with 2 completely separate pots of money.
And you can watch my full conversation with State Senator Blake Tillery right now on the Atlanta News First app. The code to scan right there is on your screen. You can get up-to-the-minute notifications sent straight to your phone. Next on the record, Georgia leaders demand action after deadly ICE immigration operations.
The On the Record newsletter sends every story impacting Georgia's political landscape straight to your inbox. Scan the code on your screen to subscribe today.
On On the record right now, rising tensions surrounding President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown, the use of force by federal agents being placed under the microscope after 37-year-old ICU nurse Alex Preddy was killed during an encounter with Border Patrol agents. It is now the second deadly shooting by federal agents in Minneapolis during what the Trump administration has called its largest ever immigration enforcement operation. Homeland Security officials say that Preddy was armed at the time, but it's unclear if he brandished a weapon during that struggle with ICE officers. The scenes from Minnesota now leading to calls for change, with protesters pouring onto the streets of Metro Atlanta and amplifying concerns that similar operations could come here to Georgia. Democratic legislators in our state have condemned the massive ICE operations, including U.S. Senator John Ossoff.
The Trump administration's lawless chaos must end. Masked federal agents must cease beating American citizens, raiding Americans' homes without a judge's warrant. These killings of American citizens by federal agents must be fully investigated.
But some Republicans say that law enforcement is being unfairly vilified. Congressman Buddy Carter is running to replace Ossoff in the U.S. Senate. Last week, he renewed his push to bring a larger-scale ICE operation to Atlanta, writing on social media, quote, "It's time to send ICE to Atlanta so we can get those criminals off our streets." And we're back for the final time with our panel today. Jason, this is obviously hitting a huge boiling point all across the country on both sides of the aisle. But do Republicans need to be careful here? We've seen people call them out for hypocrisy, especially when it comes to that kind of sticky issue of the gun presence in this case.
Republicans do need to be cautious on that, obviously. And I've gone on record, pun intended, of saying that Alex Preddy had every right to have a gun there. This is one, he wasn't there to seemingly to cause problems with it. I know plenty of Republicans who bring their guns to places and protests and meetings and all that because they have a right. Simply because they have a right. But I think really what we're looking at is a powder keg waiting to explode. And I place all the blame on Governor Walz and the mayor of Minneapolis. I have been in law enforcement situations. I have served warrants. In fact, when I was with the Department of Insurance, we served a warrant on an insurance agency. And I was a press officer then, so I was the only one not wearing the bulletproof vest when we went in. And so I've been in those situations where you're dealing with a law enforcement action, and the stress is up, the fear is up, and people are going to act on emotion when things happen. And it does not help that the governor is not allowing the border enforcement agents who within ICE to actually do this job, to actually find the people who are here illegally, arrest them, and deport them. Instead, they're having to deal with all this chaos on every side, people running and obstructing them, and that creates a tense situation. And we've seen now two people who did not have to die in situations going on in Minnesota. And this is only happening in Minnesota. This is not happening in Georgia. This is not happening in Texas. This is not even happening in Illinois, where the chief of police in Chicago criticized what was going on in Minnesota, that the fact that the police were not supporting the federal agents.
Right. And finally, Madeline, kind of the opposite question. Is this something that maybe Democrats can use to their advantage going into the midterms? Do you see any daylight where this could maybe change not just the narrative, but maybe even the policy on immigration?
Yeah, so I think they have actually an extraordinary opportunity to change the narrative here, but they're not latching on to it. So the truth is, you can look it up in the lawsuit that's currently from the LA Press Club versus DHS and Kristi Noem. It is actually DHS policy that if a bystander is filming an ICE agent, that is illegal, that it constitutes doxing, and that it threatens the safety of ICE agents, and they're allowed to therefore use any means necessary to stop them. That would explain why the ICE officer that we see in the incident with Alex Preddy, why that ICE officer walked to a woman who was standing off to the side and pushed her and took out some pepper spray to spray her when she was just holding up a phone, and that's what started all of this. Mm-hmm. This is a chance to reframe the narrative that the Democrats have not latched onto, because I think we agreed on everything, including the sanctuary city policy, but I don't blame the rhetoric from Governor Walz and from Mayor Frey. I think the blame actually lies with the administration that's training ICE officers to escalate things in this way. I think that the blame lies with the people who are holding up photos of people who are supposed to be violent criminals and saying this is who we're arresting, when actually we know that only 5% of the people who are currently in ICE detention have ever committed a violent crime. So I think it comes from the narrative that's coming from up top, and it's on the Democrats now to latch onto the truth and to make sure that those points are being communicated to the people.
All right, well, we appreciate both of your candor today. Thank you for coming in. And that's going to do it for us. We appreciate, again, our guests, Jason Shepard and Madeline Somerville. And thank you, as always, for watching. We'll see you back here next Sunday.